All right, so you want to jump into some DC Comics, but you're totally confused on the continuity. This is part 3 and the final part that'll really help you out in understanding what's going on with the current continuity. First was Flashpoint, which basically erased everything that happened prior to that event. Then there was Convergence, which not only really negated the events of Flashpoint, but it negated the merge of the universes, which happened during the Crisis on Infinite Earths. So now all of those universes and timelines were allowed to exist and evolve. So now we are post-Convergence, which signified the end of the New 52 era and the beginning of the Rebirth era. So considering the event of Convergence, what histories were kept and where are we right now? What does Convergence have to do with anything, if anything at all? We're gonna dive into the Rebirth lunch, which will answer some of those questions. Let's get into it. Okay, so we begin Rebirth with someone talking, and there's this clock here referring to this clock that their uncle gave them, and he ended up losing it. It turns out that the person saying all of this is, of course, Wally West. And as you can see, we'll get there, the Batman here. This is a classic depiction of Wally West, red hair, all of that. And he pops up in Batman's Batcave or what have you, saying that he needs his help. Now Batman thinks he's his Flash, Barry Allen, and he's really having trouble staying here, and the Speed Force keeps trying to pull him back in. Before this happens, he tells him that he's Wally West and that the letter he got from his father is how all of this started. He tells him to ask Barry Allen about all of this, and then he's reeled back into the Speed Force and he disappears. This letter that he's talking about is the letter that Barry gave him at the end of Flashpoint, which we talked about in part 1. The letter was from a timeline when Bruce and his mother were killed instead, and Thomas, Bruce's father, took the mantle of being Batman. So Wally's life is flashing before his eyes in the Speed Force, at least his life before the events of Flashpoint, he says. Now he's referencing his classic origin. Wally is Iris's nephew, freak accident. He becomes Kid Flash and was part of the Teen Titans. This is cool because it's signifying the bringing back of those classic origins. He even discusses him becoming like Big Flash when Barry died during the events on the Crisis on Infinite Earths and what have you. Hell, he even talks about how Flashpoint changed everything, and he speaks on those events. He says that an outside force, though, attacked as the timelines came back together, or were coming back together after Flashpoint. It took like 10 years away from the timeline of everyone. So yes, this is a mess, but it'll all make a little sense soon. So Wally visits some elderly man in the old folks home, and he tells him to find the Justice Society. I didn't know who he was until he says, "Say you." For those that don't know, this is Johnny Thunder, who can summon that Genie Thunderbolt. He was part of the Justice Society way back in the day. So this is clearly a nod to the old, I mean, way back in the gap old continuity. But yet again, he's sucked back into the Speed Force. And then we get a scene with some lady in custody saying that she can see into the future. Oh yeah, and by the way, Superman, he's been missing. He's dead, really, according to them. And I forgot to mention that. But anyway, we get to see Choi, if I can get here. Captain Adam's little assistant walking into Adam's lab, and a video plays, and Adam discovered what he calls this microverse, right? And he left the belt for Ryan so he could shrink and come basically save him, and really the universe. Apparently he discovered some mind-blowing or something mind-blowing. Obviously there's a lot going on. Hell, we even get a Blue Beetle sighting right here as well. And speaking of Blue Beetle, Dr. Fate, of all people, shows up and reveals to Cora that Blue Beetle's scarab is not alien tech. It's actually magic. We're also seeing other newer heroes, like I believe this is Jessica Cruz's Green Lantern, and there's a reference to Wonder Woman talking about her twin brother, which has great power like Darkseid. This is just setting up really some some scenes and future narratives, that is. Now moving on, Wally is still in the Speed Force and he feels someone dead, that of course being Superman. But there's weird things that he does notice, such as Green Arrow and Canary not really knowing who, you know, they are. They don't, Green Arrow doesn't really know Dinah Lance, and vice versa. And moving forward, again, Superman is dead, but we see Clark, Lois, and John here, right at this motel. Now, this Superman is from some other parallel world. He's saying that similar events that happen on his world are happening here, such as Superman dying. We'll get some more info on that later. Here we see Aquaman. He ends up proposing to Mira here. But anyway, Wally decides that he's going to link up with Linda. Now, Linda has been his love interest for some decades, but she doesn't know who he is, right? She has no idea who he is. So this causes him to sort of spiral out of control until he sees the other Wally, that is. And this is the black version of Wally West. Now, the way they set this up is that he's now his cousin. So they both exist, right? They both happen to be named after their grandfathers, Wallace. So with people not knowing who he is, Wally has accepted really his fate, you know, accepted that this version of Wally's gonna be Kid Flash, everything's all good, I'm gonna go ahead and die, it's whatever. And he's gonna permanently become basically one with this Speed Force. And he goes to say goodbye to Barry, thinking that, all right, he's not gonna know who I am, nobody does. So he's saying hello and goodbye. And the Speed Force pulls him in, or is pulling him, but he grabs him. Barry ends up grabbing him out of there. And he starts to remember, you see him hugging right here, he starts to remember who he is, who Wally is. So Wally explains to him that Flashpoint changed everything, but there were some events that really happened outside of Flashpoint that had nothing to really do with Barry, that is. And he explains that someone else took 10 years away from everybody, and you know, it was to weaken them, right? So obviously this is setting up the scene for some next level threat, and that sets up the scene for what is to come really moving forward with Rebirth, or with the Rebirth era. Now this clock and this button that everybody keeps referencing, you know, see these watches and whatnot. This is in reference to Dr. Manhattan and the Watchmen, right? And the Doomsday Clock, that is. So let's discuss. So right now we are in the DC Universe era, but the DC Universe era did not wipe out the events of Rebirth. That was just a rebrand. So if you want to get caught up with everything going down right now, start by reading Rebirth era issues. In those individual issues, you will really begin to learn which histories were kept with some of these characters from like after the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now this clock and this button that kept appearing, there's a series called Doomsday Clock, which you can check out, and that'll really get to explaining everything. So don't be intimidated, jump into the Rebirth series and you'll be able to get caught up. You'll be fine on what's happening right now. Flashpoint again led into the New 52 era, and Convergence basically wiped it. And here we are with Rebirth. It was fun to really take that trip down memory lane. So I'll be doing some videos about like Doomsday Clock and some Rebirth era arcs. But until next time, man, y'all be easy.